It's live.
Okay. Hi, and a very good evening to all of you. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the JGLS Alumni webinar by a distinguished alumnus, Mr. Shyam Agarwal, on the topic of the practice of real estate litigation in India. I'm Professor Shireen Moti, Assistant Professor of Law and Director of the Office of Alumni Relations at OP Jindal Global University. For the uninitiated, OP Jindal Global University is a multidisciplinary university which was started in the year 2009 under the visionary leadership of our Chancellor Mr. Naveen Jindal and our Vice Chancellor Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar. In the span of over a decade, OP Jindal Global University has been recognized as an institute of eminence, and the Jindal Global Law School has been ranked as the #1 law school in India by QS World Rankings. Before I invite our speaker for today, I would like to introduce him briefly. Mr. Shyam Agarwal graduated with an LLB honors degree from Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University in the year 2017. Mr. Agarwal started off his career in litigation at the chambers of Mr. Pawan Narang, a renowned lawyer in the field of white-collar crimes. Thereafter, Mr. Agarwal worked at the chambers of Mr. Yashraj Singh Diora, advocate on record at the Supreme Court of India, where he got the opportunity to work on diverse areas of civil law. Mr. Agarwal has recently started his independent law practice under the name of Arya Law Chambers. During today's webinar, Mr. Agarwal will be discussing the ways and means of developing a successful practice in the area of real estate laws in India, the Consumer Protection Act 1986, the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act 2016, and the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 that offer remedies to distressed home buyers will also be discussed during the webinar. With this, I invite Mr. Shyam Agarwal with an introductory question that how and when and why did he decide to pursue a career in law? Welcome, Shyam. We are delighted to have you here today.
Hi, Shireen. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank JGU for hosting this webinar and inviting me for it. And I welcome all the JGU students and alumni who are attending this webinar, as well as other members of the public. I decided to do law. There wasn't an exact time where I can really put my finger on it, but I suppose the idea of doing law was always ingrained in my mind right from school days. When I graduated from class 12, I wanted to be a little more certain about going for a law degree. So I took 3 years and I did an undergrad in English honors. And by the end of my English honors degree, I had pretty much made up my mind. And the reason why I chose it was because I like reading, I like writing, I like arguing, I used to enjoy debating. And I thought that it was a very good profession to undertake if you want to make a living for yourself as well as make an impact on the world.
Okay, so socially motivated lawyer that you are. So how was the experience of studying at Jindal Global Law School, and were you part of a few societies or the mooting or the debating society? What was your experience really like?
Yes, it was a fantastic experience. Um, Apart from the pedagogy and the world-class faculty, I would say the extracurricular and co-curricular environment was so conducive to one's growth. And I was a member of the Moodco Society. I did a number of moods, and that really groomed me. It gave me a very good head start with respect to litigation. And even now, when I study my cases, the things that we learned in the classrooms at Jindal, they spark in your mind, and so definitely that knowledge and that learning goes a long way.
That's interesting to know. And apart from your formal interactions in the classroom, your informal interactions, do you want to throw some light on how important it is for lawyers or for law students to develop their own sort of community within the law school, which also is taken forward once a person enters the profession? Would you like to stress upon that a bit?
So it's very important to have a strong network with your peers in law school, because ultimately all of you are going to end up in the same profession, and you'll have to help each other when you're in the world. So especially in litigation, a lot of it is about who you know, networking, etc. For example, when I'm not able to attend the matter, I'm in some other court. I asked a friend of mine from Jindal to attend it for me. So these sort of partnerships, etc., go a long way in helping you succeed.
Okay, so community and networking are very key to a lawyer's success. So, what about the fact that you wanted to enter litigation? Was that something that you evolved into, or was that a thought when you were started pursuing your law degree? Did you do some internships which made your decision clearer, or was it the very fact for which you pursued your law degree?
Well, before I pursued my law degree, I did a brief internship with a senior advocate in the Supreme Court, Mr. Jayant Bhushan. That gave me a fairly good idea of what the litigation world is like. But apart from that, I I was fortunate to have some uncles who are practicing lawyers and whom I could look up to, and they really inspired me to jump into the profession.
So what is it that excites you about the practice of real estate laws in particular and litigation in general?
Well, litigation in general, I'll speak about first. Uh, it's a very thrilling experience personally for me to argue in court. I relish the battle with the opposing counsel. Um, it's the look on your client's face when you get a good order is unmatched. You don't need breakfast that day. You don't need lunch that day. You don't need dinner that day. Um, and apart from that, when you're doing litigation, you are working on different cases every day. It never gets monotonous. One day you're doing real estate law, another day you're doing insolvency, third day you're doing human rights. So it's like, watching Game of Thrones. Like there's a new episode every day. So it never gets monotonous. And with respect to real estate law, uh, I think it's a thriving field of litigation for young lawyers today because there is so much litigation in that field. I mean, I'm sure many of the audience members will testify to this, that almost in every household, there is somebody who has invested in a real estate project and has come back bruised from it or has some disputes with the builder or something of that sort. So, and there are many forums. There's the consumer forums, there's the RERA, there's the NCLT. All of them have concurrent jurisdiction. So, there is, I mean, it's a very large playing field. There are a lot of opportunities there.
Okay. Would you like to, I'm just curious by the reference you made to Game of Thrones, would you like to sort of, and the idea that you don't need food the day you get a good order, and would you like to take us through the whole schedule of through your working day? Like, how does your day look like when you have a lot of things to do? Like a general working day for Mr. Shyam Agarwal, what is it going to be like, or what is it like?
So, well, when the courts were operational before COVID-19, a normal working day used to start at 10:30 in court and till about, on average, you're in court till 4:30. Um, Thereafter, you have conferences with clients, and right about 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the evening, you start preparing for cases for the next day. So, in the profession, you really have to burn the midnight oil because, and you have to work those late hours. It's a very, very jealous mistress. At least in the first 10, 15 years, there is no question of having a work-life balance. So, it's a tough profession.
But it's equally exciting because if it's your
It is.
passion, then because in all of this, you never said that you get tired or you feel like taking a break. It seems like you're looking forward to your work more than trying to escape it, which even if it sounds like a rigmarole, right? So,
Yeah.
with this, what the question that I would like to ask you is that what is it that you most look forward to in your professional journey ahead? What are these key milestones that you want to achieve, or things? It could be philosophical things as well, maybe achieving a work-life balance at some point in your career. So, what are the things that you're most excited about?
Currently, I don't really care that much about a work-life balance. I only want more and more work. Um, so, I mean, the idea right now is that because I've recently started my independent practice, um, I'm excited to do more and more work and uh, expand my clientele, and get more and more court appearances. And ultimately, I see myself as an arguing counsel. Hopefully, get designated. And the ultimate dream, of course, is to become a judge. That is, I think, every lawyer's ultimate dream, because you can. That is, I think, the ultimate public service that you can do.
Exactly, and it is quite admirable that at a young age as of yours, you have that sort of clarity and you are in the right direction, which is actually very admirable. So before we enter into the topic for discussion for today, I would just like to flag it for our attendees that they can put in their questions in the chat box, which is available on their screens. And towards the end of today's presentation, Sham would be happy to answer the questions that are being posed by the audience. So getting into the topic for today, real estate litigation in India, the practice, the laws, and the nitty-gritties of that practice. The first question that I would like to ask you in that regard, Sham, really would be that what are the key opportunities that are available in the real estate sector, especially for young lawyers, keeping in mind that a lot of our audience are either law school aspirants or they are lawyers who are going to graduate soon. So what are some of the opportunities?
So, over the last few decades, there has been a marked increase in the demand for housing, especially amongst the aspirational middle class. And more people are now able to avail credit for a home, for buying a home. And at the same time, the private sector has jumped in heavily. So you have number of private players who are starting real estate projects. You have Godrej, you have Tata, you have JP, you have the top companies who are branched into real estate. And so there is a tremendous growth in these real estate projects over the past few decades. And because it's such a flourishing sector, there are also a number of legal disputes that arise, which are inevitable. And at the same time, there are various adjudicatory forums. Like I said, you have the consumer forums, you have RERA, you have NCLT. So there are many, many opportunities out there for young lawyers. And especially, I mean, whatever litigation chamber you work in, or even if you work in a law firm, you're definitely going to encounter some real estate matter.
Okay, and that is also a reason to sort of specialize in real estate laws. What would that specialization entail for young lawyers?
So are you asking me how to specialize in it?
Or whether it's a good idea to specialize in, whether you can really specialize in India, because as far as I know, a lawyer in India deals with any kind of matters, and then gradually gets to be known for a particular kind of matter. So, what would your suggestion be to somebody who's looking to develop a practice in this area?
Well, I'll just recapitulate what a very well-known senior told me. He said that when you're a litigating counsel, you have to know everything about something and something about everything. So you have to know something about all areas of law, but you have to really go deep and know everything about one area of law. And that one area of law that you end up specializing in happens over time. It depends on the kind of cases you're getting. So if you do well for one client, for one real estate client, then your name spreads and he tells other people that, oh, so and so is good for real estate matters. So that's how you gradually start getting more and more matters from that particular area of law, and you become more knowledgeable in that area of law by virtue of doing so many matters in that area. So that's how you end up specializing. It's not like a conscious decision that you wake up in the morning and you're like, I want to specialize in this. But having said that, real estate litigation is a booming sector. It's a lucrative sector. Uh, and if young lawyers do get a chance to specialize in it, why not?
That's amazing. So it's an important tip for lawyers to grab any opportunity that they get in terms of cases, and then their successful cases become their calling card for the clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the so having known that real estate is a booming sector and there are a lot of opportunities, as well as specialization is something that young lawyers might consider when it comes to the real estate sector? What are some of the common disputes that are rising in the real estate sector in current situation?
So the most common dispute, I think mostly everyone is aware of this and has encountered it, is the fact that builders more often than not delay the delivery of possession of your apartment or your plot. So that gives rise to a lot of litigation. Then there are disputes regarding quality of construction. Home buyers are often unhappy with the the structural defects, etc., in a building, and that sparks off litigation. Then there are disputes between the association of flat buyers and the builder, because the RERA says that within 1 year from delivery of possession, the builder has to take steps to form the association of home buyers, and that association will thereafter take care of the maintenance of the society. So there have been disputes with respect to transfer of the maintenance fund from the builder to the association of home buyers. So that has given rise to a lot of litigation where associations have gone to the NCDRC suing the builder. And finally, there is a lot of litigation, especially in colonies which are unregularized, pertaining to transfers that have been effected via GPA, which is General Power of Attorney, Special Power of Attorney, Agreement to Sell, Will, etc. And these transactions have come about because you are either not allowed to build in that particular area, you're not allowed to sell in that particular area, and so therefore these instruments are executed. But the law is very clear. If you look at Section 54 of the Transfer of Property Act, it says that conveyance of a property can only be done by a registered instrument, which is a sale deed. And there's a very landmark judgment on this aspect. It's called Suraj Land Industries versus State of Haryana. The citation is 2012 1 SEC 656, where the Supreme Court strongly deprecated this practice of conveying property by GPA, FPA, and they said this is not valid at all. And the only way to transfer title is by a registered sale deed.
Okay, so these are some of the disputes that are rising and are going on in our courts. How important is it for you for the home? How important is it in your view for the home buyers to be conversant with the laws and the regulations which surround real estate, as well as what are the measures one can look into when it comes to buying a property? Let's be a little preemptive and understand what home buyers are getting into and to avoid disputes altogether. I'm sorry, I'm taking away a little business from you, but let's help everyone understand that what are the things that one should really be careful about before investing, because you see people invest in good brands and good properties and builders who are well known, but then there's a whole nexus and a game behind the whole real estate industry, which is now getting exposed on a daily basis when you read the newspapers, etc. So just one or two tips on, as a lawyer, what do you think a home buyer should have done before investing in a particular property?
So, after the promulgation of the RERA Act, things have cleaned up quite a bit, because now the builder necessarily has to register himself with the RERA authority. He has to submit his details with respect to what are the projects he's executed in the past 5 years, what is the stage of completion of those projects, etc. And whatever monies that he collects from home buyers compulsorily have to be deposited in a fund. And 70% of that money can only be used for construction of that particular project. So earlier what used to happen was that builders used to raise money from home buyers and divert it into other projects or siphon it off, etc. So that has been prevented by virtue of RERA now. So I think now for home buyers, for a home buyer who is investing in a real estate project now, of course you should do your own due diligence. You should look at the credentials of the builder and whether he has a good reputation of delivering possession on time, whether he has a good reputation of not compromising on quality of construction, etc. And if you're not investing in a real estate project, if you're going to buy from an individual, then it's very important, number one, to do a very thorough title search where you're sure that the person who's selling you the property has title to the property.
Hmm.
And secondly, it has to be, like I said, by a registered instrument, because the Transfer of Property Act says that any immovable property of value more than 100 rupees cannot be conveyed without a registered instrument.
Hmm. Those are some interesting tips. Now, having known what are the things that one should look at while buying a property, if suppose this issue befalls a young couple or somebody who is invested in a property where it's a disputed property and now they are in a situation of distress, what are the legal remedies available? As you said, there are so many concurrent remedies that are
Yeah.
available. So simultaneously invoke a number of forums. So what are the broad remedies available? And then we would like you to throw some light on the rights and obligations of home buyers as well as builders under the specific RERA Act. So that is something we are most interested in knowing.
Okay, so I'll briefly talk about the three remedies. Number one are the consumer forums under the Consumer Protection Act. Second is the Real Estate Regulatory Authority under the RERA Act. And the third is the NCLT under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Now, the Supreme Court in the judgment of Pioneer versus Union of India, was recently passed in 2019, said that all these three remedies are concurrent remedies, and a home buyer can go for any one of these remedies of his choosing. Of course, he can't file both in RERA as well as consumer forum, because that would be forum shopping. You have to choose one, but you can choose either of them. Now, with respect to the Consumer Protection Act, the most important thing for you to remember is that you have to be a consumer. And to be a consumer, the good or service that you're purchasing should not be for a commercial purpose. So it should be for your own self-use. So there have been instances where the NCDRC has rejected consumer complaints because they said that the purchase was for investment purposes, for speculation. It was not for the residence of that very same person. The second most important thing is that there has to be deficiency of service on the part of the builder. Now, housing construction is part of service. That's defined in Section 2 of the Consumer Protection Act. And if you delay delivery of possession beyond the due date as specified in the agreement between the builder and the home buyer, then that amounts to deficiency of service. That has been held in the Supreme Court judgment. I'll just tell you the citation. This is Pioneer Urban versus Govindan Raghavan, citation 2019, 5 SCC 725. So in this case, possession was delayed by more than 2 years, and the home buyer went and filed a complaint before the consumer forum. While the proceedings were pending before the consumer forum, the builder said, okay, now I can give you possession. The Supreme Court said that this is gross delay and therefore refund should be ordered. So the Supreme Court granted refund of all the monies that the home buyer had paid. Now, the third thing to remember is that you can either ask for refund of the money that you paid with interest, or you can ask for delivery of possession with interest for the delay that has been caused on the part of the builder. So these are the broad things with respect to the Consumer Protection Act. With respect to RERA, you can file a complaint before RERA. Every state has its own real estate regulatory authority. Haryana has its own, Delhi has its own. And you can file a complaint before RERA under Section 18. And you can either choose for refund of the money, or you can choose for delay, or you can choose for interest on account of delay in delivery of possession. You have either of those two options. But personally, my experience with the Haryana Real Estate Authority has not been very positive, because my complaints over there have consistently been adjourned and the authority does not seem to sit. So even though the Act says that you have to decide complaints within 6 months, that doesn't seem to be happening. Now, the third remedy is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Now, I'll just give you a brief background about the code. This code was enacted in 2016 primarily as a mechanism for insolvency and liquidation of corporate debtors. Now, typically, any financial creditor or operational creditor who has a financial or an operational debt due to him can file a petition before the NCLT under Section 7. And if the NCLT admits that petition, then corporate insolvency resolution process starts for that particular corporate debtor. And a committee of creditors is appointed. So the creditors basically take over the management of the corporate debtor, of the company that is in debt. And then they manage the company and they look for resolution plans from the public at large to revive the company, to resuscitate the company. If no resolution plan is accepted by the committee of creditors, then the company goes into liquidation, which means that the assets of the company start getting sold. Now, earlier what used to happen was that all these builders, they had also taken loans from various banks, etc. And they defaulted on those loans. So banks would go before the NCLT, their petition would get admitted, and all the other proceedings of the home buyers, whether they were in NCDRC or Real Estate Regulatory Authority, they used to get stayed. Because under the Insolvency Code, under Section 14, as soon as a petition for insolvency is admitted, all the other legal proceedings against the corporate debtor get stayed. So to get over this handicap for home buyers, Parliament passed the 2018 Amendment Act, whereby home buyers were included within the definition of financial creditor. So home buyers could also file before NCLT for initiating insolvency proceedings, and they could also become part of the committee of creditors. So they also had a voice with respect to how to revive the builder, how to revive the company, etc. Now, then finally, this has been diluted now by the 2019 ordinance to the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, which says that instead of an individual home buyer going to the NCLT, now you have to have either 100 home buyers of a particular real estate project or 10% of the total number of home buyers in that particular real estate project, whichever is lesser. So one person cannot go, either 100 or 10% of the total. So this ordinance is currently in force. And finally now, there has been another ordinance that has been passed to the IBC, which says that because of the COVID-19 lockdown and the severe distress that a lot of builders and companies are in, they said that from 25th of March, which is when the lockdown began, for a period of 6 months, no insolvency proceedings will be initiated for a default which occurs from 25th March to 6 months thereafter.
Okay.
So if your due date for delivery of possession, for example, of your apartment falls within 25th March to 6 months from 25th March, then you cannot go before NCLT. But if your due date fell before that, before 25th of March, and the builder is defaulted before 25th of March, then you can approach NCLT.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So those are the comprehensive laws, and thank you for taking us through them. What we would like to know now is more specific details, if there are, about the rights and obligations that home buyers and builders have within the RERA Act. A little more detail about the RERA Act, because that seems to be the key legislation in this area of disputes.
Yeah. So the RERA Act was mainly passed because policymakers saw that the Consumer Protection Act would not be enough, because the Consumer Protection Act only provided you a remedy after the builder has defaulted. But the RERA Act was supposed to be preventive, to the extent that it envisaged the creation of a real estate authority which would supervise, which would register builders, which would supervise the construction, etc. And it also has a provision that if the builder contravenes any of the provisions of the Act or delays possession, etc., with respect to a certain number of home buyers, then the RERA itself can take over the construction of that particular project. And the RERA can give the option to all the allottees in that real estate project that, okay, fine, the builder is not performing his obligations, you go ahead and construct. Or if the allottees don't want to construct, then the real estate project can be constructed by the concerned land development authority, like in Delhi, it's DDA. So all these measures have been introduced to ensure that just because a builder is not being able to perform his obligations, the hard-earned savings of the home buyers should not go to waste, and the real estate project should come up either with the initiative of the home buyers themselves or with the government. Other things are like, for example, I already said that now registration of every builder is mandatory. You cannot advertise a real estate project or sell apartments in a real estate project without being registered. And the RERA also has the power to revoke your registration if you contravene any of the provisions of the Act. And now there is a lot more transparency that has been introduced into the system, because the builder now compulsorily has to upload on the RERA website all the permissions and sanctioned plans, etc., that he has procured for the purpose of construction of the project. And also the stage-wise completion of the project. What stage is it at? So all this transparency is for the benefit of home buyers.
Okay. And that makes the life of the home buyers a lot more easier. The next question that I have for you is that, would you like to discuss details, of course, changing names and maintaining the anonymity of your clients, with respect to the cases that you have dealt with in the sector, and just take us through in a story format that how did the client approach you, what were the disputes, how did the court react, and what kind of order did you receive from the court?
Right. So with respect to my first case was on behalf of a builder, in fact, not a home buyer. And this was a case that I did with my last senior, where the question was, you see, in building laws, there is the concept of floor area ratio. So a floor area ratio is basically a measure of how much a builder can construct on a particular plot of land. So what happened in this case was that the floor area ratio increased because the government tweaked the laws. So the home buyers or people who had purchased apartments in that project approached the civil court saying that we should be given the benefit of this additional FAR, and we should be allowed to construct, because now the project belongs to us. We have purchased all the apartments. And the court said that yes, all the additional floor area ratio that has been granted by the government can only be constructed by the home buyers, and we ultimately ended up losing that case in the Supreme Court. Then another case that I've done is where the NCDRC granted refund with 10% interest of all the monies that had been invested, because there was delay of about 2 years in delivery of possession. This was a project in Gurgaon, and we were successful in this case. The NCDRC granted a full refund, and the builder thankfully did not approach the Supreme Court. And the matter is currently in execution. We've already received some of the money. And couple of matters that I've done before the Real Estate Regulatory Authority in Haryana. Unfortunately, those haven't met with too much success, because they regularly get adjourned. At least the authority over there doesn't seem to be holding regular sittings. So these are some of the cases that I've done.
That's interesting to know, and very well pointed out that even builders would approach lawyers for litigation. Of course, not only home buyers, though these laws are meant for distressed home buyers, but as we know that rights and obligations lie on both the parties when it comes to purchasing real estate, and rightly so, even builders come to lawyers, and lawyers represent builders in matters where properties are disputed, which is great. And of course, within our bar council rules also, it's the duty of a lawyer to take up cases that come to them, and then it is for the judge to decide who is in the right and who is in the wrong. We are just aiding the court in doing so, because many of the young lawyers, or young students of law, or even aspirational students of law believe that, that we should always be in the right, but who is right is something that only the judge can decide. And also, Sham, I think you'll agree, when we are in law school, we have this whole idealism of we know what the truth is and we should always be on the side of the truth. But as and when we enter the profession, when we understand the realities, what we believe is that representation is key. Our role as lawyers is to represent the facts in the case in the right spirit, and truthfully to the judge, and then it's ultimately for the judge to decide as per the laws, that who is in the right and who is in the wrong. And that is a distinction which should be made very early on in one's career. So that's great to know. A large part of a lawyer's practice is client management and also the recovery of fee. But that is something you realize only once you are in the profession, right? But how do you really manage clients, and what are some of the tips that you would like to give to people who are inspiring to become lawyers, that how do you successfully manage clients, especially when the case is not going as per their wish, and there is so much of delay in the system, that to make your client understand that this is a normal pace and actually your case is going on in the right direction, is an art which is to be developed by lawyers. So how do you really
Yeah.
manage clients, and are there any funny, interesting stories of dealing with clients that you would like to share with the audience today?
Uh, you have to always maintain a distance from the brief. You cannot get emotionally involved in the brief, because if you do that, then you will end up getting frustrated with either the outcome or the process, etc. Because, like you pointed out, there are a lot of delays in our courts. So you have to distance yourself from the brief. You have to take a dispassionate view and do your best. Be a karm yogi, like they say in Hinduism. Just do your karm and work the hardest you can, and the outcome is not really in your hand. So it's important to maintain that distance. With respect to clients, you gradually, as you mature, you tend to become less flustered, because sometimes clients are so emotional and they are so involved in the case that you also tend to feel their pain and get bogged down, etc. So you have to guard against that, and you have to just tell the client that this is the best course of option for you, and this is how we will proceed, and the rest is up to the judge.
Okay, that's amazing. And we have got a lot of questions now, and having gone through the comprehensively to through the real estate laws today, let's get into those questions which we have received from the audience now. The first
So
question that we received from the attendees is that everybody keeps talking about networking and how networking is important for lawyers and you should start in law school. But what really do you mean by networking, and if you are shy as a person, then how do you build that community of friends, colleagues, and then use that community in a positive manner for your professional development? So what is this networking? Can you demystify this term for young law students?
well, you see, even if you're an introvert, if you are good at your work and you treat your peers and your fellow colleagues with respect, then you will inevitably end up forming a network. So the chambers that I've worked at, I am extremely good friends with my fellow juniors over there, who have also, some of them have also started their independent practice, and that happens because you develop a mutual respect for each other's work. So networking is not necessarily taking people out for dinner or drinks. It's just doing your work well and treating each other with respect. And apart from that, well, there are definitely some tools that you can use to put your name out there and for you to be known. One of them is, of course, writing. I try to write quite a bit. Maybe you can try and start a blog, um, publish regular articles about the area of law that you're interested in, publish articles in online legal newspapers or legal magazines, etc. And that's how you basically do webinars. So those sort of things help. And at the same time, you're contributing to the growth of the law by writing about it, and other people benefit from your views and your opinions.
Okay, that's a lovely response. Another question that one of our attendees has asked us is that there's this whole debate going on about the importance of college degrees in the 21st century and the disconnect between the theory and practice of law. So what he wants to know from you is that how much of your theory really comes into picture when you are practicing, and if it does not come into picture at all, then why work for higher grades when you are at law school? What is the point of working?
No, no, you must work hard at law school. It's very important. Education never goes to waste. Like I was saying, even now when I study a case, um, and there is a point of law which I've studied in law school, then I'm reminded of what I've studied, and that clarifies a lot of things in my mind about the case. So you constantly keep making those connections, but that only happens if you studied the subject rigorously in law school. So one mustn't discount the academic rigor of law school, definitely. Um, and of course, even once you enter the profession, if you have a good relationship with your professor, that helps a lot. I mean, if you ultimately want to pursue an LLM, they will give you a good recommendation if you work hard in their class. If you want to publish articles, it always helps to publish an article jointly with a professor. And of course, it's important to get good grades if you want to do an LLM abroad. Foreign universities do look at your grades. So with I wouldn't say that just because one wants to be a litigator, grades and studies in law school are not important. I think they're equally important.
Okay, so there's a related question about LLM abroad and how important is it for one to do an LLM abroad if one wants to develop a successful practice as a lawyer, or whether there is a need to pursue an LLM at all if one needs wants to enter the legal profession.
Shireen, it's funny because I was also in the same dilemma, and I continue to be in the same dilemma as to whether I should go for an LLM abroad. Um, but I have gradually come to the conclusion that at the stage of my career currently, where I'm already 3 years into the profession and I've already started a practice of my own, going for an LLM at this belated stage may not be advisable because you lose your network, you lose the clientele that you've built up, and ultimately, law is a vocational profession. You
Hmm.
learn practically on the job by appearing in court, by working on cases. But having said that, very many people have done LLMs and they've benefited from it. Some of our top lawyers have got LLMs from Harvard, be it Abhishek Manu Singhvi or Kapil Sibal. Um, so uh, it has its advantages because you gain a very meritorious alumni network. You're part of Harvard alumni or one of these Ivy League alumni. It helps your practice, it helps your work, and studying from the top professors in the world, of course, broadens your mind. So I would advise law students, if you want to go for an LLM, then go right after law school, because if you're 2 3 years into the profession, then I think it would be too late.
And is specialization during the LLM advisable as opposed to doing general LLMs, because it's a growing trend among law students to go and pursue a general LLM?
Yeah. So I know lot of my friends and seniors who specialized, who've done a specialized LLM, and they have managed to secure corporate law firm jobs abroad. So
Hmm.
I think that is the advantage that you get with a specialized LLM, uh, with respect to if you're contemplating working abroad.
Okay. With respect to the current situation of COVID-19 and the real estate sector, what do you think? Is it going to lead to more disputes? Because see, with the current order, it seems like the government is giving a leeway, and rightly so, to the builders. So, what do you think is the future of the sector?
So the sector is quite badly hit because of the exodus of migrant labor. Many of these construction sites don't have labor anymore, and so therefore real estate projects have come to a complete standstill. So I would expect most real estate projects to get even further delayed. Uh, so yes, it would, in my view, lead to more litigation.
Okay. And what do you think is the future of the legal profession as such? The some of the students want to know that some of them are graduating this year, some might be graduating in 1 or 2 years. Uh, what do you think is the future of the legal profession? What would your advice be to young law students who have just graduated, young lawyers, and how should they really start off in the legal career, given the terrible situation that COVID-19 has presented to all of us?
Yeah. So COVID-19 has definitely been a huge setback for the lawyer fraternity. Uh, Number of matters has drastically reduced. Courts are hearing matters by video conferencing, but very few and far between. Um, but I think things will gradually normalize. Uh, the number of matters that are being taken up virtually is increasing every day, and this is a positive shift in my view, because using technology and hearing matters by virtual hearing saves time. You don't have to wait in court. You don't have to travel to court. It's better for the environment. So it definitely has its advantages, but I believe physical hearings should also continue side by side. One cannot completely do away with physical hearing. So I think this year is going to be a little tough for lawyers, but I think ultimately things will normalize because a country cannot do without rule of law. So the country will always need judges and lawyers and lawyering. So and they always say that law is a recession-proof industry. So I don't think one should be excessively distraught or disappointed, and things are bound to improve and get back to normal.
So there is hope, and young students should not lose hope. And this is what I advise to my students as well, that things are eventually going to look up. Your career is going to be like a marathon, 30, 40 years. So why don't you invest this
Yeah.
time in really understanding what you care about, and develop yourself in a way that becomes important to you once you enter the profession. um, Another thing that has become a point of debate these days is whether legal services should be a part of essential services. And one of our attendees would like to know your view in this, because you can't really shut down courts, and in a way, high courts and Supreme Court are functioning on a virtual basis. But what about the lower courts, the tribunals? Because a lot of litigation happens even there. So, do you think that lawyering services or services of a lawyer should actually be should actually qualify as essential services?
Yes, I mean you're right. Uh, Lawyers are, I believe, very important, and I mean you cannot have a situation where uh, cases are getting adjourned, lawyers are not being able to get to court, etc., because that would lead to anarchy and grave injustice for clients. But at the same time, one has to be cognizant of the fact that courts are a hotbed for spread of infection because they're so crowded. So one has to
Exactly.
be careful. One has to be careful about how we open up the courts. It cannot be all of a sudden, and things cannot go back to normal. With the drop of a hat. It has to be in a phased manner. Uh, and courts are already, even the lower courts, they are hearing urgent matters. They are hearing bail matters. They are hearing matters where urgent injunctions or urgent relief is required. And gradually, these things will open up more and more. So. Uh, I don't think that there is any reason to be disappointed.
Okay. There's a whole aspect in India where justice is accessible only to a few privileged. I would largely say, and I work in the area of access to justice, so I understand that a lot of the population is just outside the litigation realm because they can't approach courts, they can't afford lawyers, and then we have this whole system of legal aid in India, which is largely dysfunctional. And I speak from a space of information and a space of having worked in this area. So, because of virtual courts, it seems like access to justice is going to improve to a large extent. However, lower courts and tribunals are slow to pick pace with technology. How do you see this changing in coming years?
Yes, so that is one of the big hurdles with respect to virtual courts. that many lawyers and many litigants do not have the resources to afford a good internet connection or to afford a laptop to do a virtual hearing from. So many lawyers, in fact, have been raising this grievance that virtual courts are a preserve only for the rich lawyers or the senior lawyers who have all these privileges of a comfortable office, of a laptop, of a good internet connection, etc. But things are changing because the E Committee of the Supreme Court has just recently set up video conference rooms for lawyers in every district court in Delhi, so that lawyers can go to those video conference rooms and do their matters, etc. So we'll have to do more of this to improve access to virtual courts.
Okay, I mean that sounds interesting, and it seems like virtual courts are here to stay. Though the COVID-19 has sort of there has been exponential take to technology in all sectors, including the education sector. I think that is something good. They've just accelerated the change of pace when it comes to using technology in various industries. There's a question from one of our attendees wherein he's curious to know that if there are so many different forums and how do you really then achieve uniformity in the implementation of law? If every state has its own sort of appellate tribunal, there is a huge issue of uniformity in law, and what is your take on that?
Well, you see, the reason why every state has its own real estate authority and its own appellate tribunal is to ensure that these forums are accessible to the common public. Because if you have one centralized forum in Delhi, then people will have to travel. It will lead to inconvenience. So what I have noticed is that the ruling of the appellate tribunal of RERA is usually followed within the state. It's binding within the state on the RERA as well as the appellate tribunal as a precedent. But with respect to appellate tribunal and real estate authorities of other states, it has persuasive value, very high persuasive value. So it is possible that the appellate tribunal of another state may take a different view about a particular position of law. But ultimately, these things, if there is a conflict of this nature, then it ultimately ends up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court clarifies the position for the whole country. So I think the fact that there are separate forums in every state helps improve access to justice, and I don't think that uniformity is that much of an issue, because you have different high courts in different states after all. So why not have different tribunals in different states?
Rightly put, because sometimes you have to balance competing interests, and this is something that access is something that is key to law, because law should be for everyone. Coming to our next question, so I'm going to leave out certain details of builders, etc., for purposes of confidentiality. But one of our attendees would like to know that his the possession of his flat or has been delayed beyond a certain date. He's a part of the association of home buyers, and they have filed a complaint. Filed a case in the court. They have appealed for refund, and he would like to know some of the reasons for which he would get a refund. So basically, I think he would like to know the in the past why has and in what cases has the court given a refund to home buyers, and he's stressing that these are his life savings, and it is very important for him to sort of understand that whether he will be given a refund by the court or not.
The courts have consistently held that when there is unreasonable delay in handing over possession beyond the due date specified in the builder buyer agreement, then refund is the permissible remedy to be granted to the home buyer, refund with interest. And what that unreasonable delay is varies, but it could range from 1 year to 7 years. So, like for example, the Govindan Raghavan case before the Supreme Court, which I cited earlier, there was a delay of 2 years. So, okay. So that's one. There has to be unreasonable delay, and secondly, if there is any justification for the delay that the builder has, for example, a force majeure event, then that will be taken into consideration by the court. For example, if I were to extrapolate the current situation, if suppose there was a lockdown in the entire country, not just for 2 months, but for the whole year, then that whole 1 year when the builder couldn't construct will be excluded. So if there is delay on account of that 1 year, then that won't be counted as delay. So if the builder can show that a force majeure event has occurred because of which he has not been able to complete the construction, then you would not get a refund.
Okay, that's interesting to know. There's a very specific question about the RERA Act.
Shireen, I can't hear you. Yeah.
Yes. Would you mind moving your earphones once, because that was an issue earlier, because I can hear you.
Shireen, I can't.
Now?
Yeah, your voice is breaking slightly. Can you just repeat your question? Yeah.
Is it clearer now? Okay. So there's a question, very specific question related to the RERA Act.
Shireen, there's a big delay in your voice.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but the sound is very muffled.
Would you like
and
to remove
breaking.
your earphones? Would you like to remove your earphones for a bit and see if
Hello?
you can hear me?
Hello.
Okay.
Okay, let me try.
I can hear you perfectly.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, your voice is still not clear and there's delay.
Okay, so I'll try again.
Just a minute. Let me try something. I think there's a network problem from my end.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, Shane, can you speak now? I can hear you, but your voice is breaking in parts and it's very delayed.
Yeah. So there's a very pointed question on whether builders need to be registered under the RERA Act. Did you get the question? I think there might be a network issue, but did you get the question? The question really is that the definition of builders, the way it is, whether they need to be registered.
No, I don't. I did not. The definition of a builder under the RERA Act, well, builder has not been defined.
Let's try
Can you hear me?
more. Wait.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you able to hear me now, Shyam? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes, but it's delayed. But you can just tell me your question. I'll try and answer it. Yes, yes, carry on. Can you hear me?
Okay. So the question really is that does the builder need to be registered under the RERA Act? Look at your chat once.
Shireen, hello. Yeah,
your voice is coming delayed and it's breaking in parts. So I think there's a network problem from my side. Should I try exiting the meeting and entering again? Oh, okay, okay.
Hi, to the audience, there's a network issue, so Sham will be just logging out and logging in a second, and he'll be joining us in a bit. Hi everyone, there's a network issue on the end of Sham, so he'll just be joining us back in a couple of seconds. So just let's be patient, and meanwhile, I'm just looking at the questions that you're sent in, and we will make sure that we answer as many as we can today. Meanwhile, if you could just confirm if my voice is audible to all of you on the chat, or if Meghna is online, if she could confirm, that would be lovely. Okay, Sham is back. Sham, are you able to hear us now?
Yes, Sajin, can you hear me?
Unmute yourself, we can't hear you.
Yes, it's better.
Yes, lovely. So can you hear me? Okay. So the question was that whether the filter needs to be registered under the HERE Act. That is a question that has come from the audience. Are you able to hear me?
Hello.
Did you hear that question?
Hello.
Why don't you remove?
Yes, I can hear you. Just can you just repeat the question?
Yes, I'm able to hear you. Are you able to hear me?
No, it's not the speaker. It's the internet connection.
Yes.
Not,
the question really is that whether filters need to be registered under the HERE Act.
Yeah, I can hear you. Just repeat the question. Yes, every builder has to be registered. Not only the builder, but every real estate project that any builder commences and for which he invites any application, that real estate project has to be registered with the RERA compulsorily.
Okay, your voice is really breaking. So the last two questions that I would like to ask you are first, what are some of the tips that you would like to give to students who are aspiring to do law? Why would somebody want to choose the career in law according to you?
Yeah, so you should read a lot.
Sham, I'm not able to hear you. You have to unmute
Hello,
yourself.
can you hear me? Hello, hello. I'm not muted. I'm unmuted only. Hello. No, I don't.
And why don't you remove your earphones and try? Fine.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Sham. So, as we
Yes, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Okay. So the question really is, why should a student pursue a law as a career? Yes. Yes.
Like I said earlier, two very simple reasons to pursue law as a career. One is that you can make a decent living as a lawyer, and secondly, you can have a great impact on the world and truly make a difference to society. So those are the two main reasons.
Okay. So great impact. And, uh, that's something. And what are some of the things that a person who is deciding to pursue law should look in a particular university or law school? What is the criteria according to you?
One should look at the faculty, one should look at the pedagogy, one should look at whether the college has an active meeting culture, and one should look at the alumni of the college. I think those are the three, four important things. And I think Jindal succeeds in all those parameters.
Okay, that's great. Okay, those are good points. Oh, that's great to know. And finally, if somebody is looking for making career in litigation, how does a young law student prepare himself or herself for a career in litigation? Because it is a tough profession. So, what are some of the things that a young law student should be investing their time in order to sort of build a successful career as a lawyer?
Yeah, so for law students, one should read a lot, work very, very hard on increasing your reading stamina, because as a litigating lawyer, you have to read a lot. And your reading material should not only be law, but even other things like literature or economics or philosophy or political science. Because if you look at all the top lawyers in the country today, they are not, they don't only know the law, they know a lot of other things, and that helps them in court. So one should have a well-rounded reading material. Read autobiographies and biographies of top counsels and judges. Two recommendations that I can give are Before Memory Fades by Fali Nariman and Courting Destiny by Shanti Bhushan. These two autobiographies really helped me with respect to giving me an introduction to what it's like to being a litigating lawyer.
Okay, that's amazing. So the two recommendations that you've really given are first that reading, the importance of reading to become a successful lawyer, and not only the law, but other disciplines as well, being literature, could be some even fiction, non-fiction, all of those things, because it helps you understand the world a little better. Especially what I would like to add is that you should be abreast with a lot of things that are happening around you. So reading the newspaper in whichever way you can access that would be a key to a successful lawyer career. And to keep oneself motivated, it is important to follow the stalwarts in your profession via maybe reading the blogs, reading what they have to say about different issues in the law or otherwise in the country, and also their biographies. So these are good recommendations that you have made. With this, Sham, I would like to really thank you for taking the time to speak to us about real estate laws, and a lot more than actually real estate laws. It was great to know your views on so many different topics, and also the fact that you were able to answer a number of questions by the audience. We at OB Global University are proud of you because you have become a positive contributor to the legal profession so early on after graduating from the Global Law School, located at the Global University. What we wish for you is to, of course, climb greater heights and become that senior advocate and judge in the future. The clarity of thought is also very inspiring coming from you. And what we would like you to do is to keep coming back, sharing your knowledge and grooming young minds so that they become, like you, positive and inspiring contributors and parts of the legal profession. Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for being so patient. And with this, I invite you for final comments, Shyam, before we close the webinar.
Thank you, Shireen. It was a really, really enjoyable experience. And I hope this webinar helped all the attendees, and I thank all the attendees for sparing the time and attending. And I want to thank JGU for organizing this alumni series. Not only does it help us connect with our alma mater, but it helps us connect with current students and alumni and share our views. So it's a great initiative, and thank you, Shireen, for being such an excellent moderator. And I must apologize to everybody. The last 10, 15 minutes, the audio was bad, and we struggled with the audio. So thank you for bearing with us.